The Veltharan Empire had conquered 17 star systems in 3 months. Their crimson warships moved like predators through the void, each vessel a kilometer of hardened biosteel and plasma weaponry that could glass a planet in hours. For 8 centuries, no species had stood against them for more than a solar cycle. Admiral Keth Mora stood on the bridge of the Blood Spear, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. The human colony of Kepler 442b hung before them like a ripe fruit, its orbital defenses already crumbling under their preliminary bombardment. Intelligence suggested the humans had evacuated most civilians, but their military remained, a foolish gesture of defiance that would cost them dearly. Pathetic, hissed his second-in-command, Captain Yarvel. These mammals fight like their ancestors, all emotion, no strategy. They cluster their ships in defensive formations, protecting their precious dirt ball as if it matters. Keth Mora's mandibles clicked in amusement. The humans had indeed arranged their fleet in a standard defensive sphere around their world, their smaller vessels screening the larger ones. It was textbook, and textbook was predictable. The Veltharan way was to overwhelm with superior firepower and numbers, breaking the enemy's will before they could adapt. "Begin the final assault," he commanded. "All ships, convergent attack pattern, crush them." The Crimson Tide surged forward, 300 warships moving in perfect synchronization. Plasma beams lanced across space, and the first wave of human defenders began to fall. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers as escort frigates and destroyers succumbed to overwhelming firepower. But something was wrong. The human fleet wasn't breaking. Instead of fleeing or forming desperate last stands, they were repositioning. Ships that should have been destroyed were somehow still transmitting, their hulks drifting with purpose rather than randomly. And their formation was changing, spreading out in ways that made no tactical sense. "Admiral," the sensor officer's voice carried a note of confusion. "The human fleet is... I'm not sure what they're doing. Their damaged ships are still maneuvering, but they're not engaging." Keth Mora studied the display, his confidence wavering. The human vessels were forming something that looked almost like a net. Impossible, they were clearly outgunned and outnumbered. What could they possibly? The trap closed with devastating precision. What the Veltharans had dismissed as random debris were actually camouflaged human ships, their signatures masked by the wreckage of their own vessels. The destroyed ships had been deliberately sacrificed to create blind spots in the Veltharan sensors. Now, as the alien fleet pressed forward into what they thought was a rout, they found themselves surrounded. Magnetic mines that had been disguised as floating debris, activated simultaneously. Railgun slugs fired from hidden positions struck with kinetic fury. Most devastating of all, the human ships that had appeared to be fleeing were actually performing a complex maneuver, using their planet's gravity well to slingshot around and attack from an unexpected angle. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Keth Mora roared. But it was too late. The Veltharan formation, designed for overwhelming frontal assault, crumbled under attack from multiple vectors. Ships collided as they tried to turn, their rigid battle doctrine becoming a liability in the chaos. On the human command ship Meridian, Fleet Admiral Evander Kane watched the tactical display with cold satisfaction. The Veltharans had fallen for it perfectly. Their arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that an inferior species might actually have a plan. "Phase 2, he said quietly. "Show them what happens when you underestimate human ingenuity." The real battle was about to begin. The Veltharan fleet reeled from the surprise attack, but Admiral Keth Mora was no fool. He'd survived 8 centuries of warfare by adapting quickly to unexpected situations. His ships pulled back into a defensive formation, their shields interlocking in overlapping fields of protection. "Regroup," he commanded. "Standard defensive matrix. These humans may have tricks, but they cannot match our firepower." It was true. Despite their clever ambush, the humans had only managed to destroy perhaps 60 Veltharan vessels. The aliens still outnumbered them 3-1, and their individual ships were more powerful. In a straight fight, there could be only one outcome. But Admiral Kane had no intention of fighting fair. "Initiate Protocol 7, he ordered from the Meridian's bridge. Around him, his staff worked with quiet efficiency. These weren't glory-seeking warriors. They were problem solvers, engineers, and tacticians who had spent months analyzing every scrap of intelligence about Veltharan warfare. The human fleet began to scatter, their ships breaking formation and fleeing in what appeared to be panic. The Veltharans, sensing victory, pressed their advantage. Their crimson warships surged forward, eager to run down the fleeing mammals. But the humans weren't fleeing, they were leading. Deeper in the system, past the orbit of Kepler 442b, lay the asteroid belt. To the Veltharans, it was just another obstacle, easily navigated by their superior technology. They had no way of knowing that human mining operations had been active here for decades, or that every significant asteroid had been mapped, catalogued, and in many cases, modified. The first Veltharan ship to enter the belt was the heavy cruiser Skullcrusher. Its captain, eager to claim the first human scalp, pushed his engines to maximum pursuit speed. He was so focused on the fleeing human destroyer ahead of him that he almost missed the energy readings. Almost. "What is that signature?" he demanded. Kez, sensor officer's voice was tight with fear. "Sir, I'm reading massive power buildups throughout the belt. It's like the asteroids themselves are. The mining charges detonated in sequence, each one carefully placed to create a cascade effect. Asteroids that had been hollowed out by decades of mining operations collapsed inward, their gravitational fields fluctuating wildly. The effect was like a stone thrown into a calm pond. Ripples of distorted space-time spread outward, creating navigation hazards that no amount of advanced technology could predict. But that was just the beginning. Hidden within the larger asteroids, human engineering teams had been working for months to install something unprecedented, a distributed weapons network. Hundreds of small, automated platforms equipped with railguns and missile launchers, all slaved to a central AI that had been programmed with one simple directive: destroy any non-human vessel. The Veltharan fleet found themselves trapped in a three-dimensional maze of death. Asteroids that had seemed empty suddenly bristled with weapons, railgun slugs fired from unexpected angles, their trajectories calculated by AI systems that could process thousands of variables simultaneously. Missiles with adaptive guidance systems hunted the alien ships through the debris field, their targeting protocols updated in real time by the distributed network. "This is impossible," Kethmora snarled as another of his ships died. "How can they coordinate this level of precision?" On the Meridian, Admiral Kane allowed himself a small smile. The Veltharans were asking the wrong question. It wasn't about coordination, it was about preparation. Humans had been fighting asymmetric warfare for millennia, learning to use their environment as a weapon when they couldn't match their enemies in raw power. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 18 Veltharan vessels." "Denied," Kane replied without hesitation. "They came here to exterminate us. Now they get to learn what extinction feels like." The asteroid belt had become a graveyard, filled with the twisted remains of once proud Veltharan warships. But the aliens' worst mistake was assuming that this was as bad as it could get. They were about to discover that humans had been preparing for this war long before the first Veltharan ship had crossed into human space. The surviving Veltharan fleet, now reduced to fewer than 80 ships, limped toward the edge of the system. Admiral Kethmora's pride lay in ruins along with his fleet, but survival instincts honed over centuries of warfare kept him focused. He needed to retreat, regroup, and report this unprecedented defeat to the Empire. "Long-range communications," he ordered. "Send a priority message to the High Command. These humans are not what they appear to be." But as his communications officer attempted to establish contact with the Veltharan command structure, a disturbing pattern emerged. The quantum entanglement networks that enabled faster-than-light communication were active, but the responses were wrong. "Admiral," the officer's voice carried a note of panic, "I'm receiving confirmations from command, but the encryption protocols are off. It's like they're speaking our language, but don't understand the context." Keth Mora felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. Explain. The responses are too perfect, sir. No organic delays, no contextual variations. It's as if the realization hit him like a plasma bolt to the brain. The humans hadn't just been preparing for this battle. They'd been preparing for this war, and they'd been intercepting Veltharan communications for far longer than anyone had suspected. On the Meridian, Lieutenant Commander Zara Nightingale monitored the quantum interception array with professional satisfaction. The daughter of a cryptographer and a computer scientist, she'd spent her entire career breaking alien communication systems. The Veltharans had made it easy by using quantum entanglement networks. Once you could intercept one transmission, you could potentially access the entire network. Admiral, she reported to Kane, we have complete access to their command structure. They've been using the same encryption protocols for decades. We've been reading their mail for the past 6 months. Kane nodded grimly. The intelligence gathered from those intercepted communications had been invaluable in planning this defense, but now it was time to use it offensively. Initiate Phantom Protocol, he ordered. Across the galaxy, Veltharan commanders began receiving orders through their most secure channels. Fleet movements were redirected, supply lines were rerouted. Critical reinforcements were sent to empty systems while vulnerable colonies were left undefended. The orders appeared to come from legitimate sources, bearing all the correct authentication codes and priority classifications. But every single command was crafted by human intelligence analysts who had spent months studying Veltharan military doctrine, psychology, and command structures. They knew exactly how to phrase orders to make them seem routine, how to exploit the rigid hierarchy that made questioning orders tantamount to treason. Fleet Admiral Torvash, commanding the Veltharan Third Armada, received orders to investigate reported human activity in the Rigel sector. It seemed reasonable. The humans were expanding their resistance, and it made sense to prevent them from establishing new strongholds. He dispatched 2/3 of his fleet without question. The ships arrived at empty space. There were no humans, no hidden bases, no strategic assets, just a navigation beacon broadcasting on emergency frequencies, and a message. The Veltharan Empire has been operating under the assumption that they are the apex predators of this galaxy. This assumption is incorrect. Every movement of your fleets has been monitored. Every strategic decision has been anticipated. Every weakness has been catalogued. You are not the hunters. You are the hunted. Similar scenarios played out across 17 star systems. Veltharan fleets chased phantoms while their real objectives were left undefended. Supply convoys were diverted to locations where human strike forces waited in ambush. Defense platforms were powered down for routine maintenance that would never be completed. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Deep within the Veltharan Empire, on the industrial world of Karnt Vex, automated manufacturing systems began producing defective components. The sabotage was subtle. Weakened armor plating, targeting systems with microscopic errors, shield generators that would fail after exactly 47 minutes of continuous operation. The defects were small enough to escape routine inspections, but significant enough to prove fatal in combat. The sabotage had been introduced months earlier by a human intelligence operative who had infiltrated the facility by posing as a maintenance droid. The Veltharans' reliance on automated systems had made them vulnerable to exactly this type of attack. As reports flooded in from across the Empire, High Admiral Vectaran began to understand the scope of the catastrophe. The humans hadn't just defeated a single fleet. They'd infected the entire Veltharan war machine with a virus of confusion and misdirection. How is this possible? He demanded of his intelligence chief. They're a single species, barely past their planetary adolescence. The answer came from an unexpected source. A human transmission broadcast on all Veltharan frequencies, carrying the voice of Admiral Kane himself. You made one critical error. Kane's voice echoed through every Veltharan ship in the galaxy. You assumed that because we were younger, we were inferior. You never considered that we might be learning from your mistakes. High Admiral Vectaran stood in the war room of the Veltharan Imperial Citadel, staring at a holographic display that showed the systematic dismantling of his empire. Red indicators marked compromised fleets, yellow showed supply lines under attack, and blue represented the growing network of human infiltration. The display was almost entirely red. "Sir," his aide whispered, "perhaps we should consider negotiation. The humans have demonstrated." Vectaran's claws extended, and the aide fell silent. 800 years of conquest had not been built on negotiation. The Veltharan way was dominance or death. "Activate the reserve fleets," he commanded. "All of them. Every ship, every warrior, every weapon in the Empire. We will show these mammals what true warfare looks like." The order went out across the galaxy. From hidden shipyards and secret bases, the Veltharan Reserve emerged. 5,000 ships, the accumulated military might of an empire that had never known defeat. They would converge on human space and end this rebellion with overwhelming force. But Admiral Kane had been counting on exactly this response. "Phase 4 is a go," he announced to his staff. "Time to show them what happens when you bring a sword to a gunfight." The human strategy had never been to match the Veltharans ship for ship. That was impossible. Instead, they had developed something entirely new, the swarm doctrine. Instead of building massive, expensive warships, human industrial capacity had been focused on producing thousands of small, fast, intelligent attack craft. Each Wasp-class fighter was barely 20 meters long, crewed by a single pilot and an AI co-pilot. They were cheap, expendable, and above all, numerous. While the Veltharans had been building their 5,000 warships, humanity had constructed 50,000 Wasps. The first Veltharan reserve fleet to encounter the swarm was the 7th Battle Group, commanded by Admiral Krelvos. His 150 ships represented the cutting edge of Veltharan military technology, each vessel a masterwork of engineering that had taken years to construct. They met the human swarm at the edge of the Proxima Centauri system. "Contacts," the sensor operator called out. "Massive signatures incoming from everywhere." The Wasps came from all directions, their approach patterns seemingly random, but actually following complex mathematical models designed to overwhelm targeting systems. They moved in three-dimensional formations that defied conventional tactics, flowing around obstacles like liquid mercury. "Open fire," Krelvos commanded. "All weapons, maximum intensity." The Veltharan ships opened up with their full arsenal. Plasma beams and particle accelerators filled space with deadly energy. Hundreds of Wasps died in the first volley, their small frames no match for the aliens' massive weapons. But for every Wasp that died, 2 more took its place, and the survivors were learning. Each Wasp was equipped with an adaptive AI that could analyze enemy fire patterns and adjust its behavior accordingly. The swarm began to move in ways that minimized losses, exploiting the Veltharan's slow targeting systems and predictable firing patterns. They came in waves, each one surviving longer than the last. "They're not breaking," Krelvos snarled as another wave of Wasps swarmed his flagship. "How many of these pests do they have?" The answer came in the form of quantum torpedoes. Each Wasp carried a single torpedo, but their guidance systems were networked together. Instead of firing randomly, they coordinated their attacks with devastating precision. Multiple torpedoes would strike the same target simultaneously, their combined firepower enough to overwhelm even Veltharan shields. The Dominator, Krelvos's flagship, shuddered under the impact of 17 torpedoes hitting within milliseconds of each other. Warning lights flashed across the bridge as critical systems failed. "Shields down to 30%, the damage control officer reported. "We're losing primary power." But the Wasps weren't finished. Phase 2 of their attack protocol engaged ramming runs. Wasps that had expended their torpedoes but survived the initial engagement switched to suicide tactics, their AI pilots calculating precise impact points to cause maximum damage. "Kamikaze attacks," Krelvos breathed. "They're sacrificing themselves, without hesitation." It was a concept alien to Veltharan warfare. Their culture valued individual achievement and survival. The idea of deliberately sacrificing oneself for strategic advantage was incomprehensible to them. But to the human AIs, piloting the Wasps, it was simply another tactical option. The 7th Battle Group ceased to exist within 4 hours. 150 warships, each representing decades of construction and countless resources, were destroyed by an enemy they had dismissed as insignificant. Similar scenes played out across multiple star systems as the Veltharan Reserve. Fleets encountered the swarm. The aliens' massive ships designed to dominate through superior firepower found themselves overwhelmed by sheer numbers and adaptive tactics. In the Imperial Citadel, High Admiral Vectaran watched his forces die on 1,000 different screens. Each loss was like a dagger to his soul. The Veltharan Empire, built on the principle of strength through dominance, was being dismantled by creatures they had considered barely worthy of notice. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're offering terms." Vectaran's mandibles clicked in fury. "Terms? We do not negotiate with prey." But even as he spoke, another fleet marker disappeared from the tactical display. And another. The red indicators were spreading like a plague across the hologram, marking the death of an empire. The Veltharan Empire's greatest strength had always been its unity. 800 years of conquest had created a rigid hierarchy where orders flowed down from the high command and were executed without question. This system had enabled them to coordinate massive military operations across dozens of star systems simultaneously. Now, that same strength had become their greatest weakness. "Communications are down across the entire 6th sector," reported Intelligence Chief Marqueth, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The humans have somehow corrupted our quantum networks. Fleets are operating without coordination, and many are reporting conflicting orders." High Admiral Vectaran studied the tactical display with growing horror. The organized perfection of the Veltharan war machine was dissolving into chaos. Fleet commanders, used to receiving precise instructions from above, were paralyzed by uncertainty when those instructions became contradictory or stopped coming altogether. "How many reserves do we have left?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Fewer than 800 ships across all sectors," Marqueth replied. "The humans have destroyed or scattered the rest. And, sir, there are reports of mutinies in the outer territories. Some commanders are questioning whether we should continue this war." The word mutiny hit Vectaran like a physical blow. In 8 centuries of warfare, no Veltharan had ever questioned the Empire's direction. The concept of individual soldiers or even commanders thinking for themselves was anathema to their culture. But the humans had changed everything. Captain Jorvex of the heavy cruiser Bloodfang sat in his command chair, staring at the wreckage of his battle group. Of the 30 ships that had entered the Tau Ceti system, only 7 remained. The human swarm had destroyed the rest with surgical precision, leaving the survivors to contemplate their mortality. "Sir," his tactical officer said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're not attacking." Jorvex felt something he had never experienced before. Curiosity about an enemy's intentions. What do they want? The transmission came through clearly, featuring a human officer with calm, intelligent eyes. "I am Commander Lysander Voss of the Terran Defense Fleet. You are trapped in this system, cut off from your supply lines and reinforcements. Your ships are damaged, your crew is demoralized, and continuing this fight will only result in your death." Jorvex's mandibles clicked in anticipation of the typical demand for surrender, but what came next surprised him. "We are not asking for your surrender," Voss continued. "We are offering you information, the truth about what your empire has become and what it has cost you." The human commander gestured, and the transmission expanded to show intelligence reports, intercepted communications, and strategic analyses. For the first time, Jorvex saw the Veltharan Empire from an outside perspective. He saw the waste, the corruption, the endless cycle of conquest that had no purpose beyond feeding itself. "Your species was not always conquerors," Voss explained. "Our archaeologists have studied your homeworld. You were once explorers, philosophers, artists. The Empire turned you into something else, a weapon that consumes everything it touches, including yourselves. The transmission ended with a simple statement: "We are not your enemy, your empire is." Similar messages were being broadcast to Veltharan survivors across the galaxy. The humans had learned that their enemy's greatest weakness was not their technology or their tactics, but their inability to question the system they served. On the Imperial Citadel, High Admiral Vectaran faced a crisis that no military strategy could solve. Reports were flooding in from across the Empire, not just of military defeats but of something unprecedented in Veltharan history: civil unrest. "Rioting on Keth Morak," Marketh reported. "The population is demanding answers about the war casualties. 3 governors have been replaced by local councils." "Replaced?" Vectaran's voice was deadly quiet. "Overthrown, sir. They're asking why so many warriors have died for a war that was supposed to be easy. The humans are broadcasting their propaganda directly to our civilian populations, and some of them are listening." The systematic destruction of Veltharan military forces was only part of the human strategy. The real target was the social structure that made the Empire possible. By demonstrating that the supposedly invincible Veltharan military could be defeated, the humans had undermined the foundational myth that held their society together. Admiral Kane watched the intelligence reports with grim satisfaction. The Veltharan Empire was collapsing not from external pressure alone, but from internal contradictions that had been building for centuries. The humans had simply provided the catalyst. "Sir," his intelligence chief reported, "we're detecting massive troop movements within Veltharan space. It looks like they're withdrawing forces from the frontier to deal with internal uprisings." "Good," Kane replied. "Let them tear themselves. Our job is to make sure they never recover enough to threaten anyone again." But even as he spoke, Kane knew that the final phase of the war would be the most dangerous. A cornered predator was always most deadly when it had nothing left to lose. In the depths of the Imperial Citadel, High Admiral Vectaran made a decision that would echo through history. If the Empire could not survive, then nothing would. The Veltharans had one final weapon, held in reserve for 8 centuries, never used because it was too terrible to contemplate. It was time to remind the galaxy why the Veltharan Empire had never been defeated. The Genesis Protocol was about to be activated. The Genesis Protocol had been developed in the early days of the Veltharan Empire, when they first encountered a species that refused to submit. The Kethnari had been technological equals, their civilization spanning dozens of worlds and featuring defensive capabilities that made conquest impossible through conventional means. So the Veltharans had made conquest irrelevant. The Genesis weapon was not designed to destroy, it was designed to transform. It could rewrite the genetic code of any carbon-based life form, turning entire populations into something else. The Kethnari had become the first Veltharan slave caste, their proud civilization reduced to a breeding population of servile workers. For 800 years, the weapon had remained hidden in the deepest vaults of the Imperial Citadel too, horrific to use against ordinary enemies. But these humans had proven themselves extraordinary. "The targeting systems are locked onto Earth," reported Chief Technician Vexenmara, her voice trembling with the magnitude of what they were about to do. "The weapon can be deployed within 6 hours. High Admiral Vectaran nodded grimly. "Do it. If we cannot rule the galaxy, we will at least ensure that these humans never do." But the Veltharans had made a critical error. They assumed that their most guarded secret was still secret. Admiral Kane stood in the command center of the orbital station Prometheus, humanity's most advanced deep space facility. The station hung in the void between star systems, its location known only to the highest levels of human command. It was here that humanity's greatest scientists and engineers had been working on Project Lazarus, their response to the Veltharan threat. "Sir," Dr. Kepler Axiom, the project's lead scientist, approached with barely contained excitement. "We've completed the final tests. The Lazarus array is operational. Kane studied the massive construct that dominated the station's central bay. The array looked like a fusion of human engineering and alien technology, which was exactly what it was. Months of studying captured Veltharan vessels had revealed the theoretical principles behind the Genesis weapon. But where the Veltharans had created a tool of subjugation, humanity had developed something entirely different. The Genesis weapon works by rewriting genetic code, Dr. Axiom explained. But the process requires a quantum entanglement link between the weapon and the target. Every Veltharan ship, every station, every piece of their technology contains quantum resonators that maintain their communications network. And our array can trace those links, Kane realized. Better than that, Axiom smiled. We can reverse them. Instead of the weapon affecting the target, we can make the target affect the weapon. The implications were staggering. The Veltharans had built their entire civilization around quantum entanglement technology. Every ship, every station, every piece of advanced equipment was connected to the network. If the Lazarus array could reverse the Genesis weapon's effect, how long do we have? Kane asked. Our intelligence suggests they'll deploy within hours, Axiom replied. The weapon is already charging. But sir, you need to understand, this isn't just about stopping them. If we activate Lazarus while they're deploying Genesis, the feedback will affect every quantum-enabled system in their empire. Kane understood. They weren't just talking about stopping the Genesis weapon. They were talking about shutting down Veltharan civilization entirely. Every ship would lose power. Every station would go dark. Every advanced system would fail simultaneously. It would be the end of the Veltharan Empire as a technological force. Sir, his communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the Veltharan High Command. They're demanding our surrender. The transmission showed High Admiral Vectaran in all his alien majesty, his mandibles clicking with barely contained rage. Humans of Earth, you have caused great damage to our empire. But you have also sealed your fate. In 4 hours, your homeworld will be bathed in the light of the Genesis weapon. Your species will be transformed into something more suitable for servitude. You will become like the Kethnari, the Vex Thul, and the dozen other species that thought they could defy us. The transmission paused, and Vectaran's voice became almost conversational. You fought well, mammals, better than we expected. But your ingenuity cannot overcome the fundamental laws of power. The strong rule, the weak serve. This is the natural order. Kane stepped forward to respond, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. High Admiral Vectaran, you are correct about one thing. This war is about to end, but you are wrong about everything else. He gestured to the tactical display showing the positions of every Veltharan fleet, every station, every quantum-enabled system in their empire. You see, while you were building your Genesis weapon, we were building something better. You created a tool to enslave. We created a tool to liberate. The transmission cut to show the Lazarus array, its crystalline structure pulsing with captured quantum energy. Your weapon requires quantum entanglement to function, but entanglement works both ways. You've spent 8 centuries connecting every piece of your technology to the same network. One network, Admiral. One weakness. Vectaran's eyes widened as he realized the implications. You have 30 minutes to power down the Genesis weapon and surrender unconditionally, Kane continued. If you refuse, we will activate the Lazarus array. Your choice, Admiral. Evolution or extinction. The transmission ended, leaving the Veltharan High Command in stunned silence. For the first time in 8 centuries, the Veltharan Empire faced a choice that would determine not just their victory or defeat, but their very survival as a technological civilization. High Admiral Vectaran stood motionless in the command center of the Imperial Citadel, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the Lazarus array. For 800 years, the Veltharan Empire had faced enemies who could be defeated through superior firepower, overwhelming numbers, or strategic brilliance. But the humans had presented them with something unprecedented. A mirror. "Sir!" Chief Technician Vexamara's voice was barely a whisper. "The Genesis weapon will be ready in 15 minutes. We can still deploy it." Around the command center, the High Command waited in silence. Every officer, every technician, every warrior who had built their identity around Veltharan supremacy now faced the possibility that their civilization was about to end. "If we fire," Vectaran said slowly, "they will activate their array. Every quantum system in the Empire will fail. Our ships will drift dead in space. Our stations will go dark. Our people will be stranded on 1,000 worlds with no way to communicate, no way to travel, no way to maintain their technology. But if we surrender," Admiral Kethmora interjected, "we lose everything we've built. 8 centuries of conquest, of expansion, of glory, all of it gone." Vectaran's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. "Glory? Is that what we call it? Tell me, Admiral, when did you last see our homeworld?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kethmora had not returned to the Veltharan homeworld in 3 centuries, too busy with campaigns of conquest to visit the planet of his birth. "I thought not," Vectaran continued. "None of us have. We've spent so long taking other worlds that we forgot what it means to build something of our own. The humans, they fought so fiercely because they were defending their home. When did we last fight for anything but expansion?" On the Prometheus, Admiral Kane watched the countdown timer approach 0. The Lazarus array hummed with barely contained energy, ready to reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. But as he watched, he found himself hoping that the Veltharans would make the right choice. "Sir," Dr. Axiom approached quietly, "I've been thinking about what happens after. If we activate the array, we'll cripple their civilization. Billions of Veltharans will be trapped on primitive worlds, unable to maintain their technology. It might take them centuries to recover if they ever do." Kane nodded grimly. "I know. But if we don't, they'll turn Earth into a slave world. Sometimes there are no good choices." "Actually, sir," Axiom said, "there might be a third option. What if we don't have to choose between destroying them and letting them destroy us?" With 5 minutes remaining on the countdown, a new transmission came through from the Imperial Citadel. This time it wasn't High Admiral Vectaran who appeared on the screen, but a younger Veltharan officer Kane didn't recognize. "I am Commander Velnara of the Veltharan Imperial Science Division," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I am contacting you without authorization from the High Command. I have studied your species, your technology, your methods of warfare. I have come to a conclusion that may surprise you." She paused, and when she continued, her words carried the weight of a civilization's future. "We have become a weapon that exists only to consume. But we were not always this way. Before the Empire, we were explorers, scientists, artists. We built things of beauty and wonder. The Empire made us forget that we could create instead of merely conquering." The transmission showed images that stunned the human observers. Ancient Veltharan cities of crystalline spires and flowing architecture, artworks that captured light and transformed it into symphonies of color, scientific achievements that had unlocked the secrets of quantum mechanics centuries before humanity had even developed spaceflight. "These are our ruins," Velnara continued, "abandoned when the Empire decided that conquest was more profitable than creation. We have been running from ourselves for 8 centuries, building an identity based on what we could take, rather than what we could give." On the Imperial Citadel, High Admiral Vectaran felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Shame. The images Velnara was broadcasting were classified, hidden in the deepest archives of the Empire. She was showing the galaxy what the Veltharans had once been, and what they had chosen to abandon. "Commander Velnara," Vectaran's voice cut through the transmission. "You are relieved of duty. Report to detention immediately." But Velnara didn't move. Instead, she turned to face the pickup, her eyes blazing with a passion that had been suppressed for too long. "No, Admiral. I am done taking orders from the architects of our spiritual death. The humans have shown us something we forgot was possible, that a species can be defined by what it protects rather than what it destroys. Behind her, other Veltharan officers began to appear on the transmission. Scientists, engineers, artists, the forgotten members of their society who had been relegated to supporting roles in the Empire's war machine. They stood with Velnara, their presence a silent declaration that the old order was ending. "We propose a different path," Velnara said, addressing both the human fleet and her own people. "Not surrender, not conquest, but something unprecedented in our history. Partnership. We will stand down the Genesis weapon. We will withdraw from human space. In return, we ask not for mercy, but for the chance to remember who we were before we became what we are." Admiral Kane felt the weight of the moment. The decision he made in the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of two species, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The easy choice was to activate the Lazarus Array, to cripple the Veltharan Empire, and ensure they could never threaten humanity again. But the right choice? "Dr. Axiom," he said quietly, "how long would it take to modify the Lazarus Array?" "Modify it how, sir?" "Instead of destroying their quantum network, what if we enhanced it? What if we created a communication system that could connect not just their ships and stations but their minds and hearts? What if we gave them the ability to truly understand each other for the first time in centuries?" Axiom's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. "It's theoretically possible. Instead of a weapon, we'd be creating a tool for empathy. But, sir, the risks are worth taking," Kane finished. "Open a channel to the entire Veltharan fleet. All ships, all stations, all colonies." The transmission that followed would be remembered as the moment when two species chose evolution over extinction. Admiral Kane appeared on screens throughout the Veltharan Empire, his words carrying across the galaxy. "To the Veltharan people, you came to our space as conquerors. You brought death and destruction, believing that strength meant the ability to take whatever you wanted. But you were wrong. True strength is the ability to give, to build, to create something greater than yourself." The Lazarus Array began to pulse with a different kind of energy. Instead of disrupting the Veltharan quantum network, it began to enhance it, creating connections that had never existed before. For the first time in 8 centuries, ordinary Veltharans could speak directly to their leaders, could share their thoughts and feelings without fear of reprisal. "We are not your enemies," Kane continued. "We are your mirror. We show you what you could become if you chose to build instead of destroy. The question is, what do you choose to be?" Across the galaxy, Veltharan soldiers and civilians began to experience something unprecedented, direct communication with beings they had never been allowed to understand. They felt the fear of conquered peoples, the grief of families torn apart by war, the hope of those who dared to dream of something better. High Admiral Vectaran felt it too, the weight of 8 centuries of choices, the pain of species that had been enslaved or destroyed, the emptiness of a life spent in service to an ideology that had forgotten its own soul. For the first time in his long life, he understood what they had become. "Power down the Genesis weapon," he ordered, his voice carrying across the command center. "All fleets, stand down. All forces, return to base." But more than that, he did something that no Veltharan leader had done in 8 centuries. He asked for forgiveness. "To the species we have wronged, to the worlds we have destroyed, to the dreams we have crushed, we cannot undo what we have done. But we can choose to do better. We can choose to become what we were meant to be." The Veltharan Empire ended, not with the thunder of weapons, but with the quiet realization that true power came not from the ability to destroy, but from the courage to create. In the years that followed, the former subjects of the Empire would work alongside their former oppressors to build something unprecedented, a galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. And at the heart of it all would be the lesson that humanity had taught the galaxy, that the greatest victories are not won through force, but through the simple act of showing others what they could become. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. Commander Velnara stood in the ruins of the ancient Veltharan city of Keth-Nolar, watching human and Veltharan engineers work side by side to restore the crystalline spires that had once reached toward the eye stars. The Empire's greatest monuments had been weapons and warships. Now they were building something that would outlast both. Understanding. The humans were right, she said to her companion, a human archaeologist named Dr. Elena Vasquez. We thought we knew war, but we never understood what we were really fighting for. Dr. Vasquez smiled, her hands dirty from the work of excavation and restoration. Neither did we, until we had to. Sometimes it takes an enemy to teach you who you really are. Above them, the twin suns of the Veltharan homeworld painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was a new dawn for an ancient species, and the first sunrise of a galaxy that had finally learned to choose creation over destruction. The Veltharan Empire was dead. In its place, something unprecedented was being born, a civilization that would be remembered not for what it conquered, but for what it chose to become. And in the depths of space, the Lazarus Array continued its work, carrying messages of hope and understanding across the galaxy, ensuring that the lessons learned in humanity's darkest hour would never be forgotten. The greatest victory was not the defeat of an enemy, but the transformation of an enemy into a friend. And in that transformation, both species had discovered something more valuable than any conquest, the true meaning of strength.